I'm really pleased to have Mark Chipman and Steve Chipman participate in an interview. I'll just introduce them briefly and then they'll come up. Mark is the executive chairman of the board of True North Sports and Entertainment and the Winnipeg Jets Hockey Club. In addition, he serves as the governor of the Winnipeg Jets on the NHL's Board of Governors and is chairman of the True North Youth Foundation. Of course, there's a detailed bio on the website and also in the conference magazine. Steve Chipman is president and CEO of Birchwood Automotive Group. He's a lawyer by profession and a highly experienced business leader. As I mentioned, he's attended the previous ELO forums and also joined us in Oxford a few years ago. Under his leadership, Birchwood Automotive Group, which started actually 55 years ago, has grown to become one of Manitoba's largest automotive dealership groups, currently employing over 1,100 people. I titled this interview session, Jets, Cars, Family, Community, and Values. So just to be clear, I've got a handful of questions just to get the ball rolling, but I'd encourage all of you to ask as many questions as you'd like. As I mentioned, the way we'll do that, just so it's done in a bit of an orderly fashion, is we'll have the number up on the screen, 778-628-5131, which will be up there throughout the session. Just text those questions to me. As I'm asking some pre-planned questions, I'll just work in whatever questions are posed. So we found the best way to do that is just for me to sit up here and just keep feeding the questions and make sure it's done in a bit of a logical fashion. We cover a lot of different topics. So with that, Mark and Steve, if you guys can come on up and we'll get started.
You know, that wasn't it wasn't a good experience. It was a great experience. Going to Oxford, that was unbelievable.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. You know, part of what we try to do through ELO is provide the best training for Christian business leaders anywhere, and that environment is just phenomenal. I mean, there's literally 1,000 years of history at that university. So
and I got to know Albert Cron through the whole deal too. That's been great. So
yeah, that's right.
You make friendships out of it. It's
if you want a new pair of shoes, Albert's your man.
And he's a car nut too. That's fantastic.
All right, so we have a lot of ground to cover. As I mentioned, I'll have my phone with me, so just start texting whatever questions you'd like. So between the two of you, there's a lot of ground to cover in terms of business activities. But what I'd like to start off with is, of course, your father was quite a successful business person. And from the research I've done and what I've seen online, he seemed to have some very clear values in terms of how to do business and how to succeed in life and business. So maybe each of you could talk about, from your perspective, just first of all, how the business started and a bit about your father and his approach and how that impacted each of you.
Well, I think my father was a serial entrepreneur. He started in the finance side of things. My grandfather, I was living in Ontario at the time with my dad when I was a young kid, and my grandfather bought a truck dealership here in Winnipeg, so my dad moved back. My dad's plan was to buy 10 businesses, own 10 businesses that each made $100,000, and he could become a millionaire. That was his plan.
What year was that?
1960. And the plan wasn't going very good, I'll be honest with you. My grandfather sold the business shortly after we moved back to Winnipeg, and if murder had been legal, my mother would have killed my grandfather. So my dad gave up a career in the banking and finance that we should have been living in Toronto by now. Anyway, but he got into a whole number of businesses. He got into a car business with a friend of his called Cheryl Haddad. It was called Haddad the Mad Arab. I don't remember if you could even say that in these days. But
so repeat that.
Haddad the Mad Arab.
That's a bit politically incorrect these days, too.
Right, and there was like a guy across the street, Joe Gladstone, and they had this battle, the Jews against the Arabs, and they used to advertise that. It was like crazy, but you couldn't do that today, but that's how it was. And General Motors came to the
Steve, I have to say, this interview is already a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. I think Mark is maybe going to stop you from explaining anymore.
But that's the history. I mean, this how the world has changed. Just think about it. But he had one of his businesses he got into was a used car business, and then General Motors came to him and Cheryl had it, and said, "Look, you two smart young guys. They're in their 30s. Opportunity in West Winnipeg is going to grow. We see the need for a Pontiac dealership, and we see the need for a Chevrolet dealership. We want you two guys to run it." My dad didn't have any money, but in those days, the manufacturer had lots of money, so they would finance him. So in 1963-64, the two of them started Birchwood Motors, the corner of Portage and Moray, and then 3 years later, Cheryl started Holiday Chevrolet, and that's how it all started.
And what were some of the core values that your dad had, or maybe refined over time? Because in one of the articles about him when he passed away, there was a summary of some of his principles.
Yeah, he articulated those 12 precepts at a dinner that he was acknowledged at. In fact,
We're going to dinner, yeah, the St. Paul's dinner, yes, yeah.
And I was a little mystified, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Here, these 12, I mean, they made perfect sense, but I hadn't recalled ever him trying to impart them on us directly. I mean, they were very much a reflection of his life. I would say this about my dad. Sometimes we inappropriately interchange the word value with precept or principle. I believe my dad was highly principled. And what I mean by that is I've come to learn that, I mean, you can value something that isn't based in principle, right? You could value money. You could value prestige. You could value honor, right? Principles, however, are very different. They are time-tested. They are inarguable, objective realities that you can't really argue with, right? Like, there are things like trust and respect and honesty, and those principles have been tested since we've been recording history for 4,000 plus years. That's what I think of when I think of my dad. He was principled. He lived his life in accordance and congruent with these time-tested principles. And they became his values or his precepts, but really I further believe, frankly, that those principles are divine, right? There's a source of them. And you can debate that all day long, but I challenge people, you know, if you don't believe in the validity of them, I ask them to consider the absurdity of living contrary to them and see how successful you would be, never mind business, but in anything you did. That's what my dad was. He was principled, and he knew where the source of those principles came from, and he was an example of it. You know, he was just a walking, living, breathing example of living a principled life, and we were both the beneficiaries of that. That's simple.
What were some of the handful of principles that resonated most with each of you?
Well, he was honest. He was forthright, and he was honest, and he cared about people, right? He was if you described his leadership style, and I've tried over the years I've been in this world of business, I've studied carefully leadership because I needed to. I came into the business from practice in law. I didn't have the skill sets to lead a large organization, so I learned them. But the one, and there's libraries full of books on leadership. But what I think my dad was, he was a servant leader. He really fell into that category of servant leadership, which I believe is the most impactful, most powerful form of leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Where you subrogate your own interests first and always for a greater good, whatever that might be. And he's willing goodness for other people. And that's infectious, and you can't fake that either. Either that's either in your DNA or it isn't. You can't learn that in a book. You can perfect it or you can get better at it, but that was in his DNA. He knew how to serve first. That's the number one principle that I took away from my father.
And then Steve, for you, what principle?
Well, the need to give back to the community. That, he cared about people. He had an infectious smile, and I never saw my dad get angry. Maybe once, I remember that, but.
You had way better grades than I did, though. Like,
So, but no, really, I never saw him speak ill of other people, or he really just cared about other people, and his employees loved him, and it's been so hard. It's been a challenge to follow in his footsteps. It's been, because he knew everybody's name, he knew their families, he'd walk through the shop and be talking to guys, and how's your son doing, how's his baseball team, and how's your daughter doing with her dance, and he just knew all that stuff, but he did it because he cared for them.
So as the company grew, from when he started in business until his career ended, do you think that he had the vision of specifically growing the business, or do you think it was an outgrowth of adhering to those principles?
I think it was both. I mean, like Steve said, he was a serial entrepreneur. The only battles we ever got in with him would be, was the pace at which he wanted to go at, right? And because he came from the finance side of the business world, he was about leverage, right? And he understood it. So he was always pushing to grow in whatever way, shape, or form, whether it was organically or whether it was by just pure expansion. He just loved to invest in people and in businesses, and
we got in some goofy businesses.
Really, really goofy.
It was tough to make him sell a business. That was the hardest thing. We have a bagel shop, and we were making windows. We were doing all sorts of crazy things that we had no expertise in, but he just thought we should go try it. So he was just...
Fortunately, most of them worked out, but there were some colossal, and I'm not laying this at his feet. We all went along with it, but we had lots of failure along the way, and some real crucible moments, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he wasn't a believer in failing fast. They'll tell you
no.
He did not believe it. He kept giving the guy, let's give the guy a chance.
Yep.
Let's give the guy another opportunity. He's not doing a very good job here, but maybe he does something there. So he wouldn't fire anybody. No.
Well, maybe that's a good time to just talk about the notion of failure, because one of the common entrepreneurial dynamics is that entrepreneurs may experience failure, but they're not defined as a failure. So I think sometimes people will observe individuals who've succeeded overall, but not recognize they've experienced a lot of heartbreak, failure. So maybe just dig a bit deeper into, here's one thing we failed at, and here's what we learned from that. The bagel shop sounds interesting.
I forgot about that one, actually.
My dad always wanted to own a restaurant. So that wasn't a very good deal. No, and when bagels all came out, and we opened this bagel shop on Pennant Highway, and it would just lasted, about 6 months?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll move on.
That would. There are a lot bigger failures than our foray into the bagel business, but it's a good example of one where it was sort of like, we can do this, so let's just do it.
Well, and and Peter talked about 22% interest. I remember those days in the car business back in 79, 80, and we had like 3 Toyota dealerships in Winnipeg, and he'd put people who worked for them in the dealerships to run them, and they're all colossal failures. And in hindsight, we should have kept those businesses because Toyota's such a great brand right now. But that was a real challenge, because I remember my dad come home one night at dinner, and he was just like, he was a beat guy because the bank was knocking on the door, 22% interest rates. It was tough. And lots of car dealerships went under in the early 80s because of that.
So let's just talk a little bit about the family business side of things. So we've talked about your dad being in business. So maybe describe the nature of what you're doing collectively with the different business interests as how it functions as a family business.
Sure.
He looks after hockey, I look after cars. We get together once a month, talk about life.
Yeah,
I never ask him who's starting for the Jets, people who's playing tonight. I don't even ask him that kind of stuff. I focus on cars, and he focuses on hockey.
That's pretty accurate, and we, but we, I think we've been very fortunate. I think most people in this room would know how difficult it can be to run a business with, inside of a family, and that's never been a challenge for us, to be honest with you. I can honestly say I don't think there's ever been a time where Steve and myself and my brother Jeff ever have had an impasse, of any significance. We don't always agree on things, but we've been fortunate. And I would credit that reality or that to my father again, because he had a way of organizing us in such a way that, we were never, ever, compared to one another, or there was just a civility to the way he ran the business. And one of his most famous lines was, I think we've had enough discussion on this subject. And that's when you knew when to shut up, right? Like, it was like, yeah, I think we've had enough discussion. And I would go, okay, that's it. Because if you pushed beyond that, then things could get uncomfortable, but they never did.
Mm-hmm. We have a third brother who's now retired, but he ran a real estate company. We had a real estate arm. So we have some real estate investments, but he's retired. But he's a shareholder with us, and we meet with him regularly as well, too. So
yeah, so there's a formality to what we do. We have a board, and we meet with some regularity. We have professional management, very talented professional management that, that kind of guides us from an administrative and financial perspective. It's a little bit unique in that we are shareholders, we're directors, and we're operators as well. So we've kind of got a layer in between of professional management that just helps, guide and counsel, and that's proven to be for me very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then how would you describe the value system, like the faith value system that each of you have, and then how that impacts how you do business?
okay, well, I'll confess I'm a Catholic. I'm a Roman Catholic. I've been a Roman Catholic all my life.
But married to a Mennonite.
Yes, but she's converted. I was able to win that. She saw the light. No, sorry. No, I mean, I try and see God in everything. That's where I start my day, how I start my day, in gratitude, and the fact that God is everywhere. And I look for the opportunities to find God. So I do an exercise in the morning, at the end of the day, where have I seen God today? Where am I going to see God today? And that's kind of the formalities or the simplicities of it all. So,
Yeah, or Sir Mark.
No, I mean, that's a lesson that we would have learned through the teachings of Ignatius of Loyola that espouse that you can see God in everything. And I have a regular routine every morning, an hour that I allow for myself to reorient, because it's very, very easy to get pulled off course. I'm sure you all know that. In the business I'm in, it's very easy to get pulled off course. So I've been relying more and more as the years have passed on my faith, and it's a I'm proud to say a very, very deep faith. I too am Catholic, though, and I would say my spiritual hero is Catholic, but I also believe very much in an expanded view. I think one of the challenges that Catholicism has faced is it's been too narrow in its perspective. It's become, after Vatican II, I think it became too beige, and I think we're paying for that now. So, I read. I have a routine where I include a broad range of reading, and much of it is not. I love to read theology. I've learned as much, frankly, in the past few years reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Paul Tillich as I have Ralph Martin or any of the other more modern-day Catholic theologians. So, you know, I feel like if you overlapped the Catholic Church with, you know, with the myriad of Protestant churches, there's far more in common than there is that is distinct. It's a small little sliver, and I won't get into that. That's not what everybody came here to hear me talk about today. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a very important part of my life. We live in an increasingly secularized society. Doing business in that world is becoming more and more difficult. And so I find it very liberating, frankly, to be able to come into a room like this today amongst like-minded people and talk about the importance of my faith and our faith in what we do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you find it challenging when you're in business circles where they know what your faith perspective is, and people may not just disagree with it, but maybe quite vehemently opposed to it.
You know, I'm not.
We're sneaky, us Catholics. We don't go and talk about too much.
Yeah, but that's
like, I don't think many people know that I'm Catholic. I'm often mistaken for being Jewish, more so than being Catholic. The name sometimes does that for people, but it happens. But I don't think I don't think people know that I'm. I don't think people are. I've never felt that. Let's put it that way. I've never had anybody challenge me on that, and say, you know, you're just being, you know, goody two shoes, being too Christian. I've never had my Christianity challenged by anybody in business, so I don't see that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Catholics are far too reserved. That's part of our issue. Frankly, we privatize our faith too much, I believe. And so it's difficult to, you know, you never see the word Catholicism and evangelism in the same sentence very often, though that's we're beginning to see more and more of it, because that's the essence of the church, really, was to evangelize, right? But I'm not overt about it, maybe because I've just never been. I'm probably as guilty as anyone else of being more reserved about my faith than I ought to be. So I'm not. I mean, I'm really comfortable talking to people that I know share my views. I'm not as comfortable. I don't have any social media accounts, but I see a world right now that is angry and where the profession of your faith can be construed in all kinds of very difficult ways. So, what am I saying? I'm somewhat guarded, but I'm happy. You know, once I get that signal, I'm really comfortable talking about it. Mm-hmm. But nobody's ever pushed back on me and said, you know, you're that, or challenged me because of the views I hold, the faith I hold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I'd like to do now is just focus a bit on your respective business operations. We'll start off with the car dealerships, and then we'll move on to the team. And then after that, look at some of the social activities you're involved in terms of foundations and making a difference in the community. So just to start off with the automotive group, I don't know if you can give people just a sense as to the scope of what you're doing in that sector, and then some of the challenges you've had recently, you know, with COVID and how you've navigated some of those things.
Okay, so we just bought another dealership in Winnipeg. We bought Winnipeg Dodge, so that takes us about 24 dealerships, primarily in Winnipeg. We're in Steinbach with a Chrysler store, Virden, Roblin, Carlisle, Saskatchewan with a couple stores. We have a little store in Cavalier, North Dakota. But most of our dealerships are here in Winnipeg. We've got about 30% of the Winnipeg marketplace. So There's about 1,150 employees now. So we're very centralized in how we operate. I tell people we're the most centralized in our administration process. We've developed all sorts of our own proprietary software that is very sophisticated, that really helps us. And we're trying to adapt to the new way of retail, online, that whole trend, where that's going. So that's our biggest challenge right now is people talk about electric cars, but that's just a different commodity in a sense. But the whole process of I say to guys, I say to our team, people don't want to be sold a car, they want to buy a car. So we have to help them buy a car. They don't want me to sell them a set of tires, they want to buy a set of tires. So how do we best serve our customers' needs? So that's where we're working at, trying to evolve that. We went through COVID. It was a V, as Peter showed. It was for us, and the car business came back like a gangbusters. It was traumatic in March, and I said to our team, I said, look, this is going to be a challenge. We're going to be a better company when we come out of this. We just have to learn a whole bunch. We have to adapt. We have to adopt. We're going to be a stronger company, and I think we are. So that was the strategy. That's what the car business is about. And supply chain issues. I talked to somebody said waiting a year for a car. I thought Peter was going to throw me under a bus there when he said, you know, supply chain issues, why is inflation? I just read an article today, the cause of inflation in the U.S. is the high price of cars. And I'm telling you, manufacturers, they're the ones that usually have the biggest control on the value of a car, the price of the car, and they're not having any incentives on cars right now. And there's no low interest rates. So, but you know, you need to have, we're at, boy, I was wrong. I'm usually right when forecasting car sales. I've been pretty good. But this year I was completely wrong. I thought we'd be able to sell more vehicles. We planned for it, and then all sorts of goofy things have happened, supply chain issues, including microchips, that the car production is off, and I don't think it's going to be anywhere much better next year. So I've been saying for the last 2 years, it's going to be 18 months before we get back to normal. But it's not a bad deal for us with not as many cars on the lots. You drive by car dealerships, there's no cars on the lots. In fact, that's better for us in one sense. If you order your car and we ship it in and drop it off, because we pay interest on that vehicle as soon as it leaves the factory. So my interest costs are down. The demand for vehicles, there's still a pent-up demand. I was looking at Peter's charts there on the housing demand, trying to figure out with the car demand. There's people who need cars. You're in an accident, your car breaks down, right? You need a new car. The people who want cars. There's still enough people out there who need cars. The want may be diminished a little bit because of high interest rates. So we're challenged there, but it's right now, and it's crazy right now for us because it's make the plug. It's winter tire season, right? Don't wait till it snows. Winter tires work at 7 degrees above zero, right? To help you stop, avoid accidents. So,
That could be the major takeaway from the entire conference, right there.
so get your winter tires. So.
I'm glad you stopped short of saying you've got terms they can live with, too. I'm envious of Steve's role in the automobile business. I actually that's what I came back to Winnipeg to do after a brief period of practicing law, was to work for my dad in the car business. I did that for quite a while. I guess must have been close to 15 years, and then the past 20 or so on the hockey side of things. I'm very grateful, very, very grateful for the strength of the automobile business that Steve took over and anchored, that got us through the pandemic, and then really thrived as soon as we started to come out of it. Because the business you don't want to be in during a global pandemic is professional sports and entertainment. Like, pandemics don't square with people paying money to sit in close proximity to one another, in a closed space. So we got killed. I mean, absolutely financially devastated. over 2 years with pretty much all of the cost of running the business and very, very little of the revenue. We purposely decided to hang on to everybody, and I'm glad we did that. We never laid anybody off. Teams that did are really struggling right now, and because everybody in this room would have a story of not being able to find talented people and losing people to the pandemic. But we really took a beating, and it's going to take us years to dig out of it, frankly. We're, thankfully, one of the things we did right from day one when we first built the building was to really manage our balance sheet, really minimize debt, pay it down as rapidly as we could. When we bought the National Hockey League team, same thing, we paid down the debt that was required very quickly, and that allowed us to survive the pandemic, frankly. So we had a balance sheet that allowed us to finance our way through, what otherwise would have been catastrophic losses.
So, and that's an important lesson we learned from our father, is don't take money out of the business.
We never have. And as much as he loved leverage, and he and I, that was a subject that we could have some heated debate over. As much as he loved leverage, we've never, honestly, there's never been a distribution. And that's how we've grown the business, right? That may sound really bizarre, but it's a fact. There's never, since we've got into the business of professional sports, there's never been, even in years when we could have, there's never been any repatriation of investment or distribution. We reinvested in the building. If we hadn't done that, we couldn't have bought the team. So it's worked for us, and so there's another principle of my father's is build your balance sheet.
Yeah. And do you think that's part of being a family business, where you're thinking long term, you don't have external shareholders to please? Do you think that factors into it at all?
Oh, for sure. I mean, and I think we all live our lives pretty much, pretty much the same way. I'm the youngest, okay, by a fair margin.
Not really. I am.
It's hilarious. But I came to learn pretty early on that the life my older brother and older sister and other older brother grew up in was very, very modest. Right? I remember the first house I lived in, and it was very, very modest. The success my dad had didn't come, it didn't come in Steve's life, like growing up. So those principles were embedded in all of them, just naturally. I came along at a point in time where things were starting to ascend for the business, but I had this example of how my brothers and my parents lived their lives, and so there's never been any pressure on the business, to live a lifestyle beyond what we need, right? And we aren't beholden to shareholders. The trickiest thing we have to do in the next few years, and I talked about it with an individual earlier today, is how do you transition this? From getting from 1 to 2. It was actually pretty easy because we had such a great example, and we've got along. And Steve has always been such a great example to me. Honestly, I had the benefit of looking up and admiring my brothers. But getting from 2 to 3, that's a whole different world. And there's lots of books written on that subject. And the chances of success are remote. And you got to be really, really thoughtful. And we've been going through this process now for years, trying to find our way through it. It's tricky, and that will be, I think, ultimately will be our biggest challenge is if we can get what we've created transition to a third generation or not. That's going to be our biggest challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, just to focus on the team, which a lot of people would be obviously very interested in hearing about. So there's one question here: when did you get the itch to think, you know what, we could bring the NHL back?
I'd like to tell you that there was some really magical story behind all this. We got involved with the unsuccessful attempt to keep the team here in the first place in '96. And out of that came this idea that, well, if we're ever going to get it back, we may as well keep hockey going. So we bought a minor league team and began to operate it. And I'm going to tell you, I didn't know what I didn't know. It was a real humbling experience. You know, there's another one of those businesses. How hard could this be, right? Like bagels. Well, let's buy a hockey team. I should confess, like, we grew up in a very sports-oriented family. My dad was a really good athlete. My brothers were both really good athletes. I played college football. There's a natural, sort of inclination towards sport in our family. It's all I remember growing up, to be honest with you. So it wasn't that difficult of a leap to get into it when we did, but it turned out to be very difficult once we got into it, and it didn't work, or wasn't working. It's a long, long story I won't bore you with, but you know, we were fortunate to get 2 leagues to come together, and to create a stable sort of AAA level of hockey beneath the NHL. Then it became financially viable. Then you could start thinking about a new building. The new building was imperative, right? I can't tell you how many times I've given this advice to would-be NHL owners. Like, you know, how do you get in? Well, first of all, you got to have a building, right? You just do. You can't go to the league and say, I'd like a team. You have to have a building. Number 2, you got to make friends with the commissioner. Okay, it's just that simple, right? There's no committees. There's no. It's just you got to earn that man's trust, and we were able to do that over several years, including that merger that he was involved in. And then you need to keep your head down, and do the work without telling everybody. And I felt particularly strong, or particularly committed to that, because the city had been through a crushing defeat of losing the team, and the idea of raising expectations and then failing, I couldn't get my head around. So it was those 3 things. We got the building built, and it was really at that time that you could start to consider it, right? I ran into Gary at the Salt Lake Olympics in 2002. We had started the process of building the building, and a friend of mine, and we drove down to watch those games, and I ran into him. And you know, I had met him before. He treated us really, really well. And I said to him, "Look, we're building a building." And he said, "Well, let's stay in touch." And that's just really how it went. It was just, and then finally in 2007. I got a call and an invitation to go to New York and make a presentation on why we thought it would work here again. There were 4 other cities that were there that day. We went last, but there was Seattle, Vegas, Houston, and Kansas City. And the only reason I know that is because I read the guest book. Like, I was the last guy to go in, so I was like, wow, we're in trouble here. We're up against Houston, we're up against Vegas, you know, like, anyhow, we came out of that meeting, and we were chosen from that group to be the next place for an expansion or a relocation. And even then, I didn't really quite believe that it would all happen, because now that's 2007. Then it was 4 years of starting and stopping, buying, you know, looking at buying Nashville, having the people from Pittsburgh come in here. You know, people will forget this, but they were in bankruptcy. We twice bought the Arizona Coyotes. We had the press conference set up for May of 2010, a year before we actually bought the team. We spent the whole week in New York, bought the team from the NHL, only to have it fall apart at the last minute. So it was a wild, wild process, but there was never a moment where I went, this is absolutely going to happen, or this is going to plan. It was 100% organic, and adjust on the fly, follow the principles, and keep your head down. That's all it was.
So why did you persist in the process when presumably many other people, maybe in other cities, would have, you know, folded after 1 or 2 attempts?
Well, go ahead.
You don't know? Oh, you don't know my brother. He's a pretty stubborn guy.
But you know what? I had the support of our family. And there was never anybody second guessing it, and especially my dad, right? Again, his love of the game and his broken heart over losing the team. And he's like, look, I don't know if you can do this, you know, but you won't find out unless you try and really try. So when you have that kind of support and confidence behind you, you know that it's okay to fail, but like just like get it done or die trying sort of mindset, right? And like I said, my whole family was incredibly supportive, and that's how, when you get into those dark moments and those, you know, those hard situations, that's how you navigate through it.
So you say clearly it wasn't just an economic calculus that if we put X amount of dollars into the effort, you know, most people in negotiations would say we'll draw a line somewhere in the sand that is just too costly.
Well, you know what? We got really lucky, to be honest with you. Okay, I mean, I don't want to suggest that we were doing this no matter what. It had to make sense, but it did, because the economics of the league changed dramatically in '04 with the salary cap and with cost redistribution. It was only then, you know, that we could turn ourselves to the math and say, yeah, we can make this work, and it does, or you know, and it has. But without that, we never ever would have been able to pull it off. But we got lucky. I mean, the Canadian dollar was at par the year we bought the team. The price of the teams, like back then, relative to what they're transacting at now, or we could never ever have done this today. Never. Yeah. So our timing was good. We just kind of hung around long enough, and the right opportunity came along, and we were able to take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. So if you look back and summarize some of the key lessons, are there lessons from that process that are lessons for you in, you know, for business people generally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, go ahead, Steve.
Well, we have a very, very wealthy partner.
We do.
So we have capital. So we've got capital. So that makes it a little easier, right?
Yeah. I mean, we share, we're 50-50 partners. We're obligated for our share of this, but it is helpful to have, we have a wonderful partner in David, and
he's been very supportive.
Very.
And, you know, so that takes some of
the pressure off for sure.
Yeah, especially the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, the only time I hear from David is if somebody gets hurt, you know, and he wants to know if the player's all right, or if he senses something, you know, that we might need, you know, him to assist with. When the pandemic hit, he was the first guy I called the next day and said, "We're going to be okay here. Just stay the course. We're going to be fine." And like I said, when you got that kind of backing and support, then
So have a good partner.
Have a good partner.
Yeah.
And partners, we don't have any other partners.
Well, I was going to say, we all know it's not easy to find good partners. So how did that relationship start, and how did it get to the point where you'd be a 50-50 investor rather than even 51-49?
So he owned the Eaton's building. It was that simple, right? We were looking for a site to build a building. I had never met him. I got approached by somebody who worked for him and said, "What do you think about the Eaton's building as a site for an arena?" Sure. We were looking for, you know, we were looking to do something behind the convention center, and one thing led to another. They vended in the property, we vended in our team. We became 50-50 partners that moment in 2001, and we've never looked back. Haven't had a disagreement in over 20 years.
That's pretty amazing.
It's the truth. He's coming in this weekend with his wife and his kids to spend the weekend, and he's not only a partner, he's a dear friend, and he has a real affinity for this city. He really does. He cares deeply about this city, and so we're blessed. Blessed.
Well, we've got just 7 minutes or so left, so I've been feeding in some of the questions from people in the group here, but send the questions to me and I'll try to work them in. I'd like to just spend the last bit of time on some of your, let's say, community activities, some of the things that you focused on. So maybe just describe some of the causes that are important to you, why you've gotten, you know, what's involved in serving in that manner, and what's the motivator.
Well, I'm more of a hands-on guy, so I work at a soup kitchen on Sundays in North Winnipeg. I do that, and I coach cross-country running at my alma mater, St. Paul's. I'm involved, provincial champions, by the way, guys, just to point that out. And you know, just involved in the church and the parish I go to, involved there. And on some boards, try and be as supportive I can. But Mark's been doing a whole bunch more, and he should tell you more about what he's trying to do for downtown Winnipeg. So he is, I admired him. I look up to him for what he's been trying to do with the core here.
Thanks, Steve. But Steve said he works at a soup kitchen. He started and runs a drop-in center every Sunday, has for 20-plus years without fail. We'll drive in from the lake to on a Sunday to serve people, some of the most vulnerable people in our community. So when he says he's hands-on, that would be a real understatement. The work I do is more organizational, I would say. I mean, on the one hand, through the team, and one of the true values of being involved in the team is the platform that it gives you to raise awareness, raise money, and to program. And so the True North Youth Foundation does three things, and it's unique because most teams just raise money, take applications, adjudicate them, and give money away. We run our own programs. We've got, this year, we'll have over 800 kids playing hockey that otherwise wouldn't play, and it's a year-long program, and it's really not designed to build hockey players, but to keep kids closer to their school and improve their attendance and graduation rates. We've been doing that for 20 years, and the outcomes have been, are very quantifiable. We have a mental health program that we developed as a consequence of the passing of one of our players back in 2011 who took his life. And rather than just, do a check ceremony at Center Ice, we hired a couple of teachers. We built a series of resources. They're now, last year we had 75,000 kids go through the program in Manitoba. It's now in Minnesota. It's in New Brunswick. It's in Alberta. It's teaching kids at that age where they have the cognitive ability to understand those early feelings of mental illness and to spot them in their peers as well. And that's been really gratifying. And we run a camp on the west end of the city. It's been around since 1930. We took it over in 2014. It's called Camp Manitou, and that kind of allows us to bring all of this programming together, to keep those kids in our hockey program attached to us in the summertime, because that's when they're most at risk. So I'm really proud of the work we do there. We've got a wonderful, wonderful team at the foundation that does that work, and a great board. The stuff I'm doing downtown, honestly, it just came as a consequence of, working downtown and seeing a deterioration in the living conditions of so many people. And it's ironically, we had a press conference this morning with the Premier and the Mayor, where they have announced some extended funding for an organization that we started called the Downtown Community Safety Partnership, which is really it's about 60 people that are trained in mental health and addiction intervention and designed to take pressure off police, fire, and paramedic, and it's working. We didn't dream it up. We've found a great example of it in the U.S. and have emulated it the past 3 years. I think I spend as much time, if not more, on those subjects than I do trying to figure out how to run a hockey team. But again, if you ask, like it would all start with the example of my father. I remember him so vividly when I was young. I remember him walking around the block in circles, and I said to my mom, "What's he doing?" He was rehearsing a speech for the year that he chaired the United Way, and he was so committed. And that legacy inside of Steve's organization is unparalleled. How many leaders of the way did you have this year?
238.
So 238 of his 1,100, contribute at a $1,200 level. That's my dad's legacy. That's his fingerprints all over us and our businesses. And as I said, goes back to what I said about him. It was that principle of service, right? Isn't that really what we are called to do? Is that not us living out our faith? Is that not God working through us? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've come to believe and read something recently. It's so hit me so hard. It's not even though. If your heart's open to the Holy Spirit, then it will do the work. It's not even you. It's just an invitation. All you got to do is unlock the door from the inside. It's just if you're looking for it, looking for God, as Steve says, in all things, then it just naturally happens, right? You can't even take credit for it. You can't Steve wouldn't take credit for the work he does every Sunday. He's the vessel for it, right? That's what we are. I believe we're conduits for that Holy Spirit, and that's what we're here to do. So I hope that doesn't come off as sounding overly pious or altruistic or whatever. I just believe that's why we're here. There's no way I'm here running a hockey team. It's so improbable. There's only one explanation for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't think it sounds pious in any event, in any way. I think it's a great testimony to the importance of faith in your lives and having a positive impact in the community. You know, we're amazingly enough already at full time, but I just want to give each of you the opportunity, maybe just to close with some, parting thought about the importance of, faith in the marketplace, for the people gathered here. If there's something that, whether it's a lesson from your father or something you've experienced, just, here's one thing that maybe people can take with them into their workplace. So I don't know, Steve, if you'd want to.
Well, I start every meeting I have with my staff or directors, and I always ask them 3 questions. What are you grateful for? What are your dreams? And how can you get better? And I think that is what we're all about, as Mark talks about. So I try and put that into, as they say, us Catholics, we're kind of sneaky, I'm not trying to evangelize, but I'm evangelizing, right? I think the importance of gratitude in your life, and I try and get that message out to people. And if people understand and they're grateful for things, then they can be generous back. It's a mirror image, right? If you're grateful, you'll be generous. So I just focus on those 2 things, being grateful and being generous.
I don't think I can add much beyond that. I imagine that most people in this room have a routine. I do, and I can't imagine starting my day without it. To ground yourself, and then test to see how long it lasts during the day, right? Like, try and walk humbly when you walk out the door, and try and hang on to it all day long. And you're going to get blown off course, but we are also been taught a method of reflection every day at the end of the day, and also an Ignatian concept of reflection, and it's very helpful because every day you do go off course, and but then you have the wonderful knowledge of forgiveness and mercy, and so begin the day anchored, and end the day reflection on how you did.
Well, those are great concluding comments. So I really appreciate the 2 of you taking time to be with us, and I'm sure everyone's enjoyed it. And we just give them a round of applause to conclude.